Good evening. Hi, everybody. My name is Maeve Turner. I'm the head of Gardens and Horticulture here at the Frick Collection. And I want to thank you all for coming out on a beautiful spring evening to sit in this subterranean auditorium and listen to me talk about plants. I'm very humbled and honored to be here and that so many of you came. I also want to thank you all for supporting the Frick at the fellow level. Your support really enables people like me and the people that I work with to do these things that we do. So thank you so much for your support. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about the gardens. Some of you have maybe heard me talk about the gardens in the past. In the past year, I've been here about a year and a half now, since just before we reopened. And I'm excited to kind of zoom in a little bit on the Fifth Avenue garden to tell you about something we've been doing in that garden that has generated a lot of excitement. Of course, you all know there are three gardens here, the 70th Street Garden, the Garden Court, and the Fifth Avenue Garden. The Fifth Avenue Garden is very special because it's the one with the most history. It's the oldest space, the former front yard of the Frick's home. And it's also kind of the garden that has the most room to play. So that makes it a little bit of fun for me and the people I work with. So of course, the garden is most well known for the stately magnolia trees. They herald the return of spring. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see that there's much more to the Fifth Avenue garden than just the magnolias. Underneath the magnolias, we've put in a diverse planting of woodland plants, native ferns, sedges, which are grass-like plants, some daffodils in there, and this was all planted last fall, so this is really the first spring they're coming into their own. I'll add that you can get a really nice view of this from the portico gallery. On the northern section of the terrace, under the majestic star magnolia tree, there's a bed that's mostly these beautiful Queen Elizabeth roses. These roses were originally suggested by Russell Page when he was on site designing the 70th Street Garden in 1977. The edge of the border has been softened with some edging plants. You can see here some catmint, lamb's ears, and lady's mantle, just to kind of break it up from just roses. And then there are planters throughout the garden that provide the opportunity to do some more seasonal accents and some additional splashes of color that you can really see from within the museum. This garden, although not strictly designed as a viewing garden like the 70th Street Garden, also, as you well know, most people who visit the garden don't get the opportunity to go in the garden. So it's really interesting to be making horticultural choices that are only seen from within the museum or from the sidewalk, and these containers are really an important opportunity for that. I'll just add that I actually have gotten multiple inquiries from people about these specific containers, even neighbors who want to recreate them and have the same ones in their garden, and I wish I knew more about where they came from. Some people have said they were going to try and recreate them, but they are like pretty beautiful, solid cement containers that are quite difficult to move around, but they are really nice. And then along the western edge of the garden is this long bed right up against the fence that borders Fifth Avenue. This bed was converted from a privet hedge to an annual display bed in the 1970s. And for a long time, it's my understanding that this bed was used similarly to the annual beds in the 70th Street Garden. Displays of tulips and other simple seasonal plantings, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, it's a beautiful thing to see as you walk along Fifth Avenue, flowers in bloom. But you may know, or maybe you don't, my position is now part of the curatorial department, which kind of gave me a little bit of access to the special exhibitions and learning about the art that is on display in the museum. I have a long-ish career in horticulture, but entering into the world of art was really very new to me, an exciting new area to learn about. So I wanted to find a way to kind of, connect the gardens and the art outside in the gardens to the art inside. And so I started thinking about our special exhibitions. After we reopened in April, the first special exhibition in the Ronald S. Lauder Exhibition Galleries was, of course, Vermeer's Love Letters. And the timing of this, it opened mid-June last year, which corresponded perfectly with summer planting season. So I started thinking about, how can I do a planting that connects to that exhibition? And looking at the three images, I was really struck, as many people are, by the bright splashes of color in an otherwise fairly muted painting. And of course, I came to learn that the bright pigments that Vermeer used, ultramarine and madder, that's really what he was known for. And I started to think about ways to incorporate that. So I put together a planting that I called, to anyone who I was speaking to, this is an homage to Vermeer. It was a base palette of blues and whites to honor his Dutch heritage, with splashes of bright reds and yellows throughout, from the dahlias mostly. And this is the border at its fullest, probably last fall. And again, it was really subtle, and honestly, you probably wouldn't have known that it was done this way to tie to the Vermeer exhibit. But I did take the opportunity to tell anyone who would listen that was, that was what I had done. So like I said, this was fall. Fall in the garden is bulb planting season, so I started looking ahead to the special exhibitions that were happening in the spring. Of course, we now have on the Gainsborough exhibit, which I hope you have all had the chance to see. I'm sure you have. The focus of the show is on portraiture and fashion, but as a plant nerd, I kept finding myself inspecting the paintings for any identifiable plants. I'm not sure if anyone else's eye goes right to the plants here. Unfortunately for me, what we have in this picture at the feet of Countess Mary Howe is common thistle, and behind the adorable Pomeranian puppies is bindweed, which is a weed so common that I've read postcards from directors of botanical gardens saying, they have lots of bindweed here too. So those didn't really seem like good places to start a planting from. One constant in all of these paintings was, everyone is pictured with an idyllic background behind them. The subjects were often portrayed with roses and other cut flowers in their hand. And this led me down the path of thinking about the quintessential British garden style, which is the cottage garden. This photo is from the Royal Horticulture Society of England. If you don't know, a cottage garden is very loosely defined as a garden with abundant plantings, masses of color, and a romantic style. They rely on a framework of repeated color and plantings, and this really seemed to me like a better, more interesting path to take than a garden of weeds. Unfortunately for me, many of the classic cottage garden plants are really plants that bloom in the late spring and early summer. You have your larkspur, peonies, foxgloves, hollyhocks, roses, and the Gainsborough show was opening mid-February and closing late May. So by the time any of these plants came into bloom, the show was going to be over. Ultimately, I landed on a selection of bulbs, tulips and fritillaries, or Persian lilies. These were going to bloom much earlier to time better with the exhibition. Many of the bulbs that I chose have the similar or same characteristics as the flowers that you would traditionally find in a cottage garden. The early and late double-flowered tulips really give that kind of peony or rose feel. And the Persian lilies, which are the tall green and purple ones there, really have that similar feel to the foxgloves and the hollyhocks. So I decided to do, a bulb display that was evoking the feeling of a cottage garden in honor of the Gainsborough exhibit. So we planted the bulbs in November of last year. That's the picture on the left. And by April, the border was pretty much at its peak. You may recall, we had a week of really 80-degree weather, and then the temperatures really dropped. So instead of having in gardening you can plan all you want, but really you're not in control. So I had hoped to have the early tulips open, and then slowly, as they faded, the late tulips would come in. But instead, everything just came into bloom all at once, which was not so bad either. It made for a pretty nice display. This display is really just coming to an end, and it's going to be removed probably early next week, and then we'll replace it a couple weeks after that. Fortunately, we have another exhibition on in the cabinet gallery, and this is the Ruffles and Ribbons exhibit. This will last through the summer. This is the last display that I have to highlight today, inspired by Ruffles and Ribbons fashion plates from the time of Marie Antoinette. So again, looking at the images or the fashion plates that were in the show, trying to think about ways to connect plants to the fashion plates, and ultimately decided to try and pick plants that were in a similar color scheme to what you see in the Ruffles and Ribbons exhibition. And I also very loosely divided them into Ruffles plants and Ribbons plants. The Ruffles plants are, frilly or wavy-edged, sweet peas, California poppies, or that purple South African foxglove, which actually is a new plant to me that I'm excited about growing. And then on the other, I guess that's the right side, the Ribbons plants. Plants that have, kind of long, smooth petals like the dahlias, the threaded foliage of the Joseph's coat called Alternanthera. And a lot of people here are very charmed by some of the cultivar names of these plants. I've generated a lot of excitement by saying we'll be growing pink champagne California poppies and Dahlia Cafe au lait. So, and then I also tried to pick some plants that really just kind of felt more like a direct, obvious connection to the show. So this plant, sometimes called sea cabbage, sometimes called angel wings, but it really just reminded me of the feathery plumes found on many of the fashion plates, including this woman in her mourning attire during the mourning of Maria Theresa of Austria. But it really just kind of struck me how similar the leaves of that plant were to the feathers in her cap. And then this is black-leafed cotton, which is a plant that I actually grew a number of times at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where I was before I came here. So that's my well-worked hand there holding a cotton ball, that it actually creates cotton balls. It also has a really beautiful, just dark foliage that will provide some nice contrast. And just seeing the cotton balls at the end of the season is really fun. And I'm not sure what, if anything, we'll do with them, but it's just a great connection to the exhibition and the fashion industry as a whole. And then one last thing about this summer display is that French gardens of the late 18th century was really when they started to embrace the utilitarian aspect of gardens, using things for both medicine and culinary uses. So I've started to develop a partnership with the cafe at Westmoreland. And so if you didn't get one of these, you're in good company, because I didn't either. But this was a dessert that was served on the anniversary of our reopening, made with a syrup that was made from the petals of the magnolia flowers. So they froze the syrup and they made a shaved magnolia granita, and served it with a strawberry rhubarb sorbet, sprinkled magnolia sugar on top, and then that's a little rosemary shortbread on the side, made with rosemary also from the garden. So we're really hoping to kind of continue this collaboration. I'll just add this sold out before the end of the day, on the day of the anniversary, so very popular. And then so over the summer in the containers we'll have other herbs such as lavender, mint, edible flowers that we hope will show up as either a garnish or more syrups, maybe in a cocktail. We recently gave them some pansy petals, viola, they're edible, so it's just exciting to see. I may think I might have a good idea, and the chefs there really, I could never have thought of this. So this is an artistic interpretation of the summer planting that we'll be planting in a couple of weeks. This is by Lisa Kaiser, who works with me, and this is the summer version of the one that was in the opening slide. Lisa is obviously a woman of many talents. I'm very grateful to have her help. And then I just wanted to say, I said that, if I didn't tell you about the Vermeer planting, you probably wouldn't have known. But thanks to my colleagues who work on the website and the special exhibitions, we were able to feature in the website about the Gainsborough show and the Ruffles and Ribbons show a little blurb about the planting and how it connects to the special exhibition. And then using, again, these beautiful renderings by Lisa. And as of today, we have a newly updated gardens portion of the website, which gives a lot of background history about the gardens, links to the pieces about the special exhibition plantings, links to videos about the garden, programs about the garden, plant lists for those who really want to know about everything that's out there. And I'm just really excited to be expanding this kind of area of the Frick in general. And also, I just wanted to say that these paintings that Lisa did of the special exhibition plantings have proved so popular that we are now selling note cards and magnets and coasters with various versions of her paintings. And lucky for you, tonight is the first night that they will actually be for sale in the shop. So that's just a little bit about the stuff we've been doing. It's only, what month is it? May. But in June is really when we start thinking about ordering bulbs for planting in November. So, we are thinking ahead to what can we do with the upcoming special exhibitions next year. And it's always a little bit humbling for me because, the art team, the curators, they're thinking 2-3 years in advance about, what the exhibitions are coming. And they're saying, well, Maeve, what do you think you'll plant? And I'm saying, I don't know what's going to be available. I thought it was, we had to work hard, to think a year in advance, but they've really humbled me in many ways. So that's it from me. I'd love to invite you up to join us for a reception up in the James S. and Barbara N. Rybell Reception Hall. Very happy to talk more about plants and plantings with anyone who's interested.